While I was doing the Box Addict Challenge, I noticed that the exact same weapons came up constantly. So I decided to hit the mystery box a few times, really over and over and over again. And then I reminded myself that the number one thing that we want in statistics is more data. So I hit it a few more times. Today we're going to look at the data I collected and try to determine if the mystery box in directed mode is the same as the mystery box in standard mode, and if it is changing throughout the game. Welcome to Spikebeat Gaming. I'm an AP statistics teacher, and I thought this would be an interesting way to look at chi-square distributions, which are covered right at the end of your typical AP stats class. Even if you aren't in or have any interest in ever being in AP stats, hopefully this video is helpful to you and gives you some insight into how you should be using the mystery box here in Black Ops 6 Zombies. Now, before I get too far, I want to clarify that this data was collected before the giant patch. I'm going to be working on getting new data and redoing this, but I spent a lot of time on this and I didn't want to waste this data. So, for the bulk of my data collection, I decided to do this on round 11 of directed mode. This was the easiest way to control for several variables. For instance, does the round potentially impact what weapons you get out of the box? Do you get better weapons as you go on? The rarity difference, does the rarity determine which weapons they're willing to give you? I'm going to do a video in the future looking at the rarity throughout the rounds. And also, I just wanted to be able to get a large sample size without anything really changing. So this was pretty simple data collection. I hit the mystery box a lot. On round 11, I hit the box 300 times, which is a good starting point, but I would love to see more data personally, but my patience and my 1-month-old's patience were not enough. I then advanced to round 15 in directed mode, and I hit the box an additional 50 times, because what I really wanted to see there is, did the mystery box change? I got the bulk of my data. I needed enough to do some just basic analysis of the difference. Then, in a brand new game, because I did not think about the fact that I needed to do round 5 originally, I went and hit the mystery box 51 times. Now, why 51? Because I moved the box. And on directed mode, if you open too many doors, that then forces you to progress the round. So I had to rely on some fire sales. I got about 12 or so hits of the mystery box, which may impact the data slightly. Not very much though, because towards the end, I got tired of playing 20 rounds in order to get 3 fire cells. So I just opened the door and I hit the box as many times as I could, and that ended up leaving me 51. Now, these 3 data sets were to establish whether or not the drop rates changed throughout the game and to give us a baseline. So after I was tired of playing the same rounds constantly, I went over to a standard game and I played rounds 0 to 50. And I hit the box about every 5 rounds. You'll notice it's not always 5 rounds because sometimes I would accidentally kill the last zombie and have to go a little further. So on round 11, I hit the box 300 times. I got 40 unique weapons. And I would say in my gut that I consistently got 4 weapons. The Tanto that you're seeing in the background here, the GS-45, the Marine Shotgun, and the Jackal. Those were constantly coming up. They were the only weapons that I thought that I actually got. Then, looking at my data, where, once again, like I said, I got 40 unique items out of the box on my round 11 with 300 hits. On rounds 5 and 15, I got 22 and 23 unique weapons, respectively. And looking at the data, it was a good moment of facing my confirmation bias and realizing that each of those weapons, I only got about 10% of the time. Now, when you think about most of the other weapons, I only got 0 or 4% of the time. 10% is huge. So, looking at the data, the rest of the weapons have that percentage, like I said, between 0 and 4%. You can see it there. I'm highlighting it a little bit. That red and white weapons are the ones that didn't occur very often. As you get into green, those happen more often. Now, the only reason I think I was able to complete the Box Addict Challenge was because I did it once the DLC weapons were added, and I think they were highly prioritized in the box. You need about 37 unique items in order to get the Box Addict Challenge, and you can see that I got nowhere close to this. Even on my round 50 game, where I played 50 rounds, hitting the box 10 times every 5 rounds, I only got 30 unique weapons. So I'm very excited that they hopefully fix this. I haven't gotten to test it yet, but I'm going to be doing that soon. So let's take a look here in a second. It's going to transition to some BO3 Origins gameplay because I really wanted to play BO2 after I pulled the Ray Gun Mark II out of the box. And it hit my nostalgia, which I know that's why they put it in the game. But it reminded me of playing with my buddy Pierce, and he's the one who got me into zombies and really changed my life through that. Because this has been a huge part of everything that I've done in the last almost 15 years at this point. So, as we're looking at this, what I loved about it is the fact that it made me feel so much, and how often the ray gun actually comes out of the box was pretty impressive. It was one of the more popular weapons. It was in the top 50% of weapons that appear out of the box. So that is something I really like to see, that it gives a lot of power to the player. But as I was playing these older CODs, I really want to go back and I want to do the similar testing here and see how it changes when I look at these older games. If you'd be interested in that, let me know in the comments and I will get to work on those. I can only do BO3 and newer at the moment, but I would love to see what the mystery box looked like back in the day. Now, let's take a look at how we're going to analyze this data. So in order to determine if the round 11 directed mode data accurately represents the standard mode box hits, we are going to use what is called a chi-squared statistic. Definition: the chi-squared statistic is a measure of how far the observed counts are from the expected counts. The formula is chi-squared equals the sum of the observed minus the expected squared all over the expected, where the sum is over all possible values of the categorical variable. We'll break this down further when we look at the spreadsheet, but it is important to know that a chi-squared distribution is for categorical data. That is, the data is not continuous in nature. You either pull the Tanto, the Marine, or the GS45s from the box. You can't get some hybrid where you have half a SWAT and half an HDR. Each weapon is distinct, and you cannot get anything that is not one of the items from the list. We'll get into the math later for those of you who are interested in it, but before we do, we need to create what is known as a null hypothesis. What do you think the truth actually is? In this case, I will define the null hypothesis as something to the effect of the mystery box drop rates on round 11 of directed mode are the same as the rates on rounds 5 and 15 of directed mode and in the standard mode as a whole. The alternative hypothesis is the opposite of the null. The mystery box drop rates on round 11 of directed mode are not the same as the rates on rounds 5 and 15 of directed mode and in the standard mode as a whole. We always want to decide what it is we're trying to test before we begin collecting data, for two reasons, really. One, it just makes life easier if you know what it is that you're trying to do. And two, if you haven't clearly defined the rules, you're going to change what you're doing in order to get better results. For instance, last night I was making chocolate chip cookies and I was trying a new recipe. I want them to turn out good. So if I'm starting to make them like, hey, this isn't working out, I'm going to change what I'm doing. And I'm not going to actually be testing the recipe. I'm going to be manipulating it and trying to make good cookies because I don't want to eat bad cookies, and I especially don't want to hand bad cookies to my wife. So we want to define those two things before we get started. Now that we have our hypotheses, we can set up our chi-squared numbers. We're going to use the percentages from the round 11 testing and then multiply them by 50 to get the expected number of times we should get each weapon. For instance, we would expect to get the Tanto 4.5 times if we were hit the mystery box 50 times because the rate was 0.093. We multiply this by 50. This data was all going to be on the same sheet, but since I accidentally hit the box 51 times on round 5, I'm doing the math twice. Does it ultimately matter that the Tanto's expected count between 50 and 51 is 4.5 and 4.59? Probably not, but I'd rather do a little bit more work than lead you astray. Looking at round 15, we throw the values into the formula given above, and we add them all together because that's what the capital sigma means. We get 23.20 as the sum, and hopefully you're asking yourself the question, is that good or bad? Now, there are a few methods for how we can figure out whether this is a good or bad number, but I'm going to use the easiest one, and that's just hitting the chi distribution function on the spreadsheet, and we get a p-value of 27.9%. Now, what does that even mean? What is a p-value? Our very mathy definition here is the probability computed assuming the null hypothesis is true that the statistic would take a value as extreme or more extreme than the one actually observed in the direction specified by the alternative hypothesis is called the p-value of the test. Now, in normal language, small p-values are evidence against the null hypothesis. It says that the observed value is likely to happen when the null hypothesis is true. Large p-values fail to give convincing evidence against the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative because the observed value is likely to occur by chance when the null hypothesis is true. Remember, p-values are just probabilities. So the question becomes, is 27.9% a small or large p-value? Typically, we are dealing with p-values that are less than 5% in order for us to reject the null hypothesis, in order to say the alternative is true. In really liberal cases, we'll use 10%, but 5% is the most common. So for round 15, I think it's safe to say the drop rates are the same because 27.9 is significantly bigger than 5. If you like fancy math terms, we call this 5 our alpha value. It's how we determine whether or not we're going to accept or reject a null hypothesis. Or reject's the wrong word. We fail to reject instead of accept. For round 5, we do the exact same thing except for one issue. Since we divide by the expected count in our formula, it is impossible to do the math if we expect 0. In this case, I chose to omit those weapons from the calculation, and I continue to do that as we go through. This is because it would break the entire system. So, as we're looking at this data for round 5, you see that we get a chi-squared p-value of 20.4, which means I would say on round 5, the weapon drop rate is exactly the same. That 20.4 is significantly greater than 5. Now, this isn't as strong of a case since 20.4 is less than 27.9, but it's interesting to consider why this may be the case. I would argue it is simply the nature of probabilities and the way they work out sometimes. If you flip a coin 10 times, it is completely possible that you get 10 heads. This isn't a very likely outcome, but it could happen, and you shouldn't be super concerned if you were to do it right now, if you grab a quarter. I one time in front of a class got 17 heads in a row. If I were to do this every day, and it happened, I might want to consider that my quarter isn't good. But there's at least 67 different weapons and outcomes from the mystery box, and I only got 23 on round 5, and 41 I got, or on round 11 I got 41. So it's very likely some of those weapons are not going to have any overlap here. It is perfectly likely that there are some weapons that I just would pull in one of those sets that I wouldn't pull in the other. Now, the first thing I want to look at as we're looking at the standard mode data now is that the Tanto, Jackal, and GS45 continue to run the show, and they run it even more because the Marine Shotgun was reduced down from dominating the list to pretty much just being a normal weapon. There was a 52% chance when I hit the box that I would get one of those 3 guns, the Tanto, Jackal, or the GS45, or it would move. The other 26 things I pulled from the box accounted for less than half of the probabilities. Nothing is jumping out to me as being weird in the data from this initial view that we're looking at that would go against our null hypothesis. So I want to do the chi-squared in 2 different ways. We're going to look at it first as a whole and then as the individual rounds. For the standard mode percentages, the total box hits is actually 97 since I only hit the box 7 times on round 5 before I ended up having to move on. So we'll be using 97 for our round 11 expected count. When we look at the overall, we get a 30.9% for our chi-squared, so we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, it's reasonable to say the mystery box in directed mode has the same drop rate as the standard mode. Now, does the box item drop rate change throughout a standard game? Well, the data is pretty ugly, and you will see it in the background here. If I had to guess why, I'd say it's simply because a sample size of 10 hits per round is pretty small. Now, the fact that there doesn't seem to be a pattern to me is a good sign. For each individual round, the p-value is basically 0. By removing the one oddball weapon in several of our batches, we get a better p-value that fails to reject instead of rejecting. But I'd say this is overall a good thing for the idea that the drop rates remain the same throughout a game. If there was a difference, I would expect to see the values change as we proceed through. Of our 10 groups, all 10 reject the null hypothesis initially, and 5 of them fail to reject the null hypothesis when we remove a weapon or 2 that had a large component. and had that leverage point kind of develop out of that. These 5 are mixed throughout the rounds, so I still feel pretty good about saying that the drop rates aren't changing throughout the game. So in conclusion, I'm pretty confident in saying that the results support the null hypothesis that the mystery box drop rates are not changing throughout the game, that they are not changing from directed mode to standard mode. And this is something that I actually found surprising. I was really expecting to see a completely different mystery box from directed mode to standard, because in directed mode, typically we're going to have those weaker players who maybe need some more powerful weapons. This is something I really like on the developer's part, because to me that's really respectful of the player, that, hey, we may be giving you some guidance, giving you some direction, but we're not going to make it easy on you. You still have to grow and improve. Now, with that said, in the era of loadout zombies, which I'll talk about in the future, I don't really ever use the mystery box. In fact, this is the most I've ever hit the mystery box, is testing for this video. I load in with my loadout gun, I max it out, get it to gold, and then I back out, change weapons, and start all over again. But I would love to know in the comments, kind of, are you using the mystery box? Is it something that you enjoy still, is hitting the mystery box trying to get some different weapons? Or are you mostly just living off of that loadout weapon? Leave a comment down below what you use the box for, and kind of looking forward, the next topics that I plan on covering. One, I'm going to redo all this data collection in order to go see what the patch did. After that, I want to look at the rarity, because I think there's a whole slew of things to look at there with rarity out of the box. And I've also been looking at some salvage drop rate information. So if you have any topics, please let me know down in the comments, and I'll do my best to get around to looking at that. Until I see you in the next video, have a good one.